like, mate choice is a very difficult problem. So how do you solve it? Well, here's how women solve it. Throw them in a ring, let them compete at whatever they're competing at, assume that the man who wins is the best man, marry him.
Yes.
It's a brilliant solution. It's a market-oriented solution. Say you're married and you have children with your husband, but you also have an affair. So you have a child by another man. That's more common than anyone suspected. So part of the way that women solve the problem that you're just describing, and I'm not saying anything for this or against this, this is a purely factual biological claim, is they pick a monogamous marriage and they cheat with high-status guys.
If it's a man who doesn't want a family and enjoys dating multiple women, why is that bad?
Well, I think the fundamental reason it's bad is because it's bad in the long run for children.
It's bad for children if he chooses to have children.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Sense.
But that's it. That's the fundamental issue as far as I'm concerned. Right. And I think it's the answer. Look, to give the journalist credit, that is the point she was making. You know, apart from pillaring me and caricaturing my perspective, that was the point she was making. Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of unbridled hierarchies. Like I already said, that, you know, the proclivity of a hierarchy is that all the spoils go to the person at the top, and that can destabilize the whole structure. Yes. So we have to have a dialogue about how to rectify that.
But how could you possibly rectify that if one man is, like, say if we've got one 6'5" beautiful man who's got a perfect body and he's brilliant and he just wants to date a bunch of women, and all the rest of the people are 5'1" and they're fat and they're lazy, and like, this guy's gonna, if this is the competition, he's going to win. There's no way around this. And even if you decide to have enforced monogamy, where it becomes a popular thing, the women are going to be more drawn to him if he chooses to date them. They might decide, I would rather have him sometimes than never at all.
That is actually what does happen.
But what is wrong with that?
Well, what's wrong with it is that it destabilizes society and it's bad for children.
Right, you said that.
Yeah, but
what if they don't want to have children? But there's a lot of people that don't want to have children. There's a lot of people that choose to go their entire life without having children. There's men in their 30s. Some of my friends have vasectomies. They don't want children. So why would that help in any way, these involuntary celibates?
Well, I think you tilt the society so that it serves the interests of, well, that's a good question.
But you see my point where
I see your point. There's no doubt about it.
You're almost forcing an inequality of outcome.
I know that was her point too. To the degree that she had a point, that was her point. Now, but it's not. It doesn't run contrary to my opinions that the issue of outcome has to be addressed. I already said there needs to be a reason for the left and the right, and that the problem with hierarchies is that they can get too steep and destabilize everything. That does happen. That particularly happens in the sexual domain, and there's plenty of anthropological evidence for that. But you still might say, well, who cares? Because the men who are winning should be allowed to win, and the women should be allowed to choose. It's like, yes, except that there's the problem of children. And so society steps in on behalf of the children. And you can say, well, lots of people don't want to have children. And yes, and that's truer now than it used to be, although many of those people end up having children anyways, you know, the guys who are sleeping around all the time, so that doesn't circumvent the problem. But the issue here for me isn't the men or the women, it's the children. We're trying to set up societies where the probability that children will be raised in something approximated an optimal environment is optimized. And that's going to mean sacrifice of opportunity and choice on the part of adults. It's necessary. I agree with you, but I think that what we're talking about mirrors what we're talking about in sports. It mirrors what we're talking about in business. It's everything else. There's going to be people that are better at all different aspects of life. There's going to be people that are talented in terms of like getting women to like them. Yes, that's true. Well, that's why also, look, you see this. Right. Women are hypergamous, which means they mate across and up dominance hierarchies. And so if you're a male who's successful in a given hierarchy, the probability that you're going to have additional mating opportunities is exceptionally high. It's an unbelievably good predictor of that. That hypergamy is a very uncomfortable discussion. Yes, it certainly is. It doesn't matter. Well, there's plenty of uncomfortable discussions to be had. That's a big one, though. It is. The idea that it defines women's sexual choices by the fact that they want bigger, better. They want someone who's more successful, someone who's higher on the social ladder.
than what they're accustomed to or what they have
Yeah, well,
now.
what women do is that, like, mate choice is a very difficult problem. So how do you solve it? Well, here's how women solve it. Throw them in a ring, let them compete at whatever they're competing at, assume that the man who wins is the best man, marry him.
Yes.
It's a brilliant solution. It's a market-oriented solution. It's actually the solution that appears to have driven our evolutionary departure from chimpanzees.
It's a biological solution.
It's a biological solution, but it has a cost.
What is the cost?
Well, the cost is polygamy. And so we rein that in with enforced monogamy. And we do that in order to provide stable circumstances for children.
Is a polyamorous society just as unattainable as this utopian Marxist idea?
Yes, I think so, because it looks like, and this is another point I was making that didn't get covered in the article, although I wrote about it somewhat extensively on my blog, is that societies tilt towards monogamy across the world. It's human universal. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't have polygamous or polyamorous tendencies, because they certainly do. And it's certainly also the case that one of the ways that women gerrymander this system is that, like, the number of children who are in a, say you're married and you have children with your husband, but you also have an affair. So you have a child by another man. That's more common than anyone suspected. So part of the way that women solve the problem that you're just describing, and I'm not saying anything for this or against this, this is a purely factual biological claim, is they pick a monogamous marriage and they cheat with high status guys. Now, you know, obviously in the confines of the marriage, that's a terrible thing, but...
That's a very uncomfortable subject, though, for women in particular.
Well, it's an uncomfortable subject for everyone.
Right, but
it's a terribly uncomfortable subject.
They don't like the idea that this is a common thing, that women choose a safe man that is willing to be monogamous with them, and perhaps maybe they're above him in a social class or in sexually, and then they'll cheat with someone who is above
well,
them.
It's common, but it's not the norm. Right, it's still the norm not to do that. The norm is fidelity.
Right.
But there's plenty of exceptions.
And this is enforced monogamy, culturally, the norm. This is the very definition
well,
of
enforced
it.
monogamy is this. It's like, okay, so my son's getting married in September. And so let's say he comes to me in a year and he says, hey, Dad, guess what? I've had 3 affairs in the last year and they've all been successful. I haven't got caught. Aren't I a good guy? What am I going to say to that? No. What the hell are you doing? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. That's enforced monogamy.
Enforced monogamy meaning the people around you try to guide them in a way that you think is going to lead to a harmonious family life.
It's built deep into the cultural norms, and if that starts to destabilize, then there's trouble. And that doesn't mean that it's not prone to all the problems that you laid out. Look, there isn't a bigger problem than successful reproduction. It is the big problem. And all of the solutions that we've generated for it are full of flaws.